After almost 2 years of talking about and pining for this camera, I finally have my hands on it, the Sony A7Cii II, and yet now I'm actually faced with an unexpected dilemma. Should I keep it when I already own possibly a better compact camera? So right out of the box, it's everything I hoped for in design and form factor. The improved grip, size, and feel with a front scroll wheel, and the general texture of the camera throughout, which makes it feel more like a proper alpha camera, especially compared to the ZV-E1. Also, we don't get those noisy, jangly eyelets, and then there's the increased amount of custom buttons and ways to customize the camera, which for whatever reason seems way more necessary than even on the previous A7C. And there's some settings you'll immediately want to customize as soon as you power up the camera, but I'll get into all that. So if you've been following this channel, almost 2 years ago when the Sony A7 IV came out, I said I was going to skip that release and impatiently wait for the next iteration of the A7C, formerly my main camera and then my travel cam, that I just recently and painstakingly sold. So check out that video if you want tips on how not to sell your used gear. But what I have been saying is that I was waiting for 10-bit colors, so S-Log3 and S-Cinetone, a better menu, improved stability, and all that still within a cheaper and more compact form factor to make the perfect travel/B cam. But then they announced the Sony ZV-E1, which had all that and more, and way more than I was expecting. Yet clearly what the ZV-E1 doesn't have is 33 megapixels, and also, which I repeat in every video, an EVF. And this is something that I don't always use, but it is something I'm always thankful to have the option to use, especially on sunny days. And the EVF's increased magnification on the A7C II is an unexpected but welcome improvement. So not only will I be doing a proper in-depth review of the A7C II by itself.
Okay, because we're running from some bad guys, we're gonna test out the stability of this camera. What do you think? On your mark, get set, go.
Let's go. Put your whole body inside here.
Go through.
Let's go faster.
Okay, on your mark.
And then maybe some overheating tests with the new Ulanzi fan like I did for the ZV-1, and a video focusing on the photo capabilities of this camera, but I will also be doing a proper comparison video like I did with the ZV-1 versus the A7C. But I wanted to give you my first impressions of the A7C II by briefly comparing it to its most direct competitor, because you may also be asking yourself, which camera should you buy, as I'm asking myself, which camera should I keep? And before I show you how I initially customized and set up the camera, this may be the most significant comparison. Okay, here's the real test. This is low light S-Log3 with auto ISO in both the Sony ZV-E1 and the Sony A7C II. I don't typically use auto ISO, but I thought it's worth testing in both of these just to see what in fact in different low light conditions you'll get. I'm gonna go into a more sort of bright condition here. There's some porch lights, and I'm gonna go into a darker, okay? So now we're seeing here again the Sony ZV-E1 is adjusting a bit slower than the Sony A7C II. I feel like both of them are using the monitor screen to sort of brighten up my face. A7C II again, and the ZV-E1. There's not a clear winner right now. I really think both of them are getting enough light. The monitors are giving enough light right now that is helping. It's also worth mentioning something that I may dive deeper into in further videos, but not all noise appears equal. So it appears that the A7C II is noisier, but that due to the higher resolution of this camera, the downsampled 7K, the noise is smaller when compared to the ZV-E1, and therefore may be less distracting. Again, something I will explore further in later videos. Again, pitch black room, so you can see how much light the monitors are giving off. So let me see if I can actually turn these around. And now let's see. So I'm gonna go step outside. I can't really see what I'm looking at. Okay, same lighting conditions as before, but The monitor is not lighting me. So let's set up this camera and go back to the beginning. Now, I recommend getting a V90 card or at minimum a V60 card and pop that in. Also, if you didn't notice, there is no charger included and no USB cable, so you have to supply your own, but thankfully anyone will do. Yeah, and I want to test this further, but not any battery will do, only Sony brand batteries. And I have a sneaking suspicion that in Sony's newer cameras and newer firmwares that they're trying to dissuade people from using third-party batteries, and maybe even third-party lenses, as I have had myself and heard of others having issues with using Rokinon lenses with this camera, and I will post on this later, but I have a Facebook group dedicated to this camera if you want to stay connected there. Anyway, let's go into our first menu page and set the 4K 24 frames per second and XAVC-S, or if you want HS, and 422 10-bit with picture profile 11. S-Cinetone as the default. So unless I'm shooting in flexible ISO mode in S-Log3, I am in S-Cinetone. But let's turn on flexible ISO mode. And I've made a whole video about that linked in the description that goes into detail about how to use flexible ISO mode. And two, which is the most important thing to know and for me to do now, is to load in my own LUTs, my GAMUT LUT for S-Log3, also linked below. So I can monitor in real time my footage, as shooting in log can be intimidating without a monitoring LUT. Within all that, I've also had to remember that there are different ISO values in the A7C II compared to my FX3 and ZV-1, and different values for both picture profiles. So for S-Cinetone, it's 125 and 500 compared to 100 and 2000. And for S-Log3 here, it's 800 and 3200 compared to the 640 and 12,800. And before I get to other custom settings, there's also a very different way I'm using ISO with the A7C II that's worth mentioning. So again, I never typically use auto ISO, but if you are going to use it, you got to make sure to change the ISO range. So before, the maximum ISO range was 12,800. Now, that is not going to be enough. I'm in picture profile 11, but this works for S-Log3 as well. So now I've set the maximum to 51,200. So again, if you're going to use auto ISO, make sure you change the maximum ISO range. Okay. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you change your temperature setting to high and then your monitor brightness to sunny weather, as well as how your monitor is linked. So when you close it, it doesn't shut off. I also changed the automatic turn off to 5 minutes instead of 1. Now, for the wheels and buttons, I changed the garbage can C1 button to APS-C mode because you have enough resolution to use that 1.5 times crop to your advantage to get 2 focal lengths within any prime. Now in manual mode in video, which I also keep the same settings in photo, something you can change in the menu as well, but I set that custom EV compensation dial to ISO and the scroll wheel to shutter, even though your top rear dials also shutter, but it's also just muscle memory for me to use it that way. And then the front dial stays as aperture, so we now have a way to regulate exposure physically without using the touchscreen, another big advantage of this iteration of the A7C compared to the ZV-1's minimal physical buttons and wheels, and I haven't set C1 yet because I've got time to figure out what I might want to use that for. And again, I have more buttons than I know what to do with, so it's worth acknowledging that Sony seemed to listen to the main gripes with the original A7C and made this better in almost every possible way, other than a full-size HDMI port and dual card slots. Now, I do think it's interesting how Nikon ZF handled that issue with stills. They added a micro SD slot for dual redundancies while still keeping the camera small. It's an interesting idea, but probably not necessary here. Regardless, my main takeaway so far is that out of the box, it wasn't exactly love at first sight, but I'm finding the more I use it and customize this compact travel camera, the more I like it, and I might be falling for it in fact. And it's been fun to discover incrementally what the potential of this camera is and can be. And I've already had a flight booked in a few weeks to Dubai and Mauritius, so I plan on bringing the A7C II along to make further discoveries with real-world tests. So consider following along as well, as I have a bunch more videos on the way. So until then, thank you guys for your time and attention.